All right, Mace. So I wanted to kind of do this post podcast interview just so that we could recap, talk about the case a little bit, and I don't know, just like get your thoughts and reactions about it. So I guess my first question is, what was your initial reaction when you heard about Richard Rogers and his crimes?
Um, I think shock was probably my first reaction. I obviously knew that we were gonna be revealing or reviewing a serial killer, so I was prepared for that. But I was shocked at like the level of which and like the people that he was targeting, that he was doing these crimes, and just made me a little like I guess not fearful, but more aware of kind of people out there.
Yeah, I feel like it's very, I guess, like telling or kind of like shocking when you hear that like serial killers sometimes target specific groups of people and not just like men, women, like they target specific, like just like like people who identify under certain identities. I feel like it's
Right.
always very shocking to learn that there are people out there who, like, think about that and they're like, "Oh, I wanna specifically harm those people," and I feel like
Yeah.
that's always very, like, alarming because you never really think of it. You feel like serial killers
Yeah.
always just, like, target random people or, like, people that they
Yeah.
know or, like, people that they just don't like, but, like, they target groups too.
Yeah. Especially whenever you fall under those groups, it's like,
Yeah.
strikes a little bit deeper.
So, my next question is, how did discussing the details of his crimes, how did that affect you emotionally during this podcast?
Um, I mean, I was obviously saddened to hear those things. Grateful that it wasn't me, but definitely made me, I guess, sad for his family, sad for his loved ones that were impacted by it, obviously, or not him, not Richard, but the ones that he did these things to.
His
And
victims.
yeah, his victims. And yeah, I really can't fathom having to go through that and like hearing that your child or your best friend or your brother or sister has passed because of these horrible, unspeakable things. Like there's trauma and then there's that level of trauma that I couldn't even fathom. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it was also, a lot worse for the victims because at the time the police weren't really, like, too much looking into it because of how they felt about the victims, and I
Right.
feel like that added, like, another layer of trauma, not, like, to the victims' families on top of them hearing that their loved one had been murdered.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Which details about the victims stood out most to you during our conversation? And I feel like I already kind of know what your answer is about to be, but
I mean, the fact that they were just like probably very similar to me, like, just very fun-loving, they seemed personable, they seemed like they were just enjoying life, going out to, like, piano bars or, just, living chilly in their home, just, like, hanging out, and they would pick them up in bars and whatnot, like, these are all things that I do, and talking to random people, like, I have a lot of trust in just, like, being able to talk to those that maybe I shouldn't have trusted, and so I think that was probably it, and then, yeah, yeah, just probably, like, how similar and how familiar it would be to me in my life.
I feel like when I was doing the research for this, I specifically chose this case for you. Not only because of, like, your connection to the LGBTQIA community, but because, like, I felt like also a lot of the victims were kind of, like, similar to you in that case, like, especially how they were just, like, very carefree, like you said, and just trusting and, like, just super sweet people all around, and they, like, wouldn't hurt a fly. I feel like I, like, saw you I saw glimpses of you, I guess I would say, in like some of the victims.
Yeah, yeah, it's chilling to think about.
Yeah, it was very, very, yeah, it was a lot for me too.
Yeah.
So, how familiar were you with this case before participating in this podcast?
I was not familiar at all, actually, with this case whatsoever. I hadn't even heard of him. Hadn't heard of any of the victims or the things that he had done to them. What his kind of style was, the things that he, or his signature, I guess. Yeah, I had no clue about any of it.
And what part of the conversation that we had during the podcast do you feel was the most impactful or enlightening to our listeners?
I think honestly, kind of it's a two-part. Is the fact that it didn't happen too long ago. I think a lot of times with serial killers, um, I don't know, at least with me, I tend to like date them further back than they actually were. But the fact that this happened in like the 80s and 90s was kind of crazy. And then also the fact that it was with the LGBTQIA community in that time period, and the just the conversations that we kind of invoked about that, the stigma around HIV and homosexuality and all that sort of stuff at that time, and also just like how government and police reacted to that, because there weren't really laws that protected the LGBTQIA community. If anything, it kind of excused people that did harm them or did crimes against them. It was like, as we talked about, the being scared or whatever, like gay, for being like someone coming onto you because they're gay, is just like
The gay panic.
the gay panic, like just using that in court and it being like, okay, I understand.
I also kind of want to talk about the laws that were around during that time because I didn't know until I was talking to you during the podcast that same-sex marriage actually was legalized in like 2015. And with you saying that like this wasn't that long ago, I feel like a lot of people kind of think like, oh, like this was like serial killers aren't really a thing now, or like they haven't been a thing for a while. But I feel like the real fact of the matter is that this person is actually still alive right now. Like he's in jail. He didn't get the death penalty. He's just alive in jail.
Right.
So I feel like I really liked a lot of the conversations that we had around the LGBTQIA community, some of the laws that were honestly recently passed, because I think like both of us were saying like 2015 is like 10 years ago.
Right.
I also really liked our conversation around the AIDS epidemic during that time.
Right.
Can you like go into that a little bit more? Because I know that you had a lot of insight about it.
Yeah. So I mean, what I know, I'm no expert by any means, but from what I know about the AIDS epidemic is that during the 80s, whenever it was being kind of first discovered and brought into light into the medical field and that sort of stuff, which Richard worked in, there was a huge stigma around it. Number one, it was called GRID. It wasn't even called AIDS at the time, and it stood for some gay respiratory something disease, I believe. And that's literally why it was called GRID. And any doctor that kind of came in contact with it, number one, was advised not to treat the patient or do anything because they didn't know like the safety precautions behind it. And so they didn't advise doctors to go in and really treat those patients because they didn't want them to catch the gay. And that's actually kind of where that came from. And then just the fact that uh, once you did go and you were kind of confirmed that you had GRID or AIDS, it was immediately released to kind of your family, the public. Like it was no longer anything that you could hide from. You would now be basically dying and without the option of anything else. And so, I mean, yeah, at the time, that's what it was. And it kind of continued through the 80s and still even the 90s a little bit. And to this day, there's still not a cure for AIDS, but there are treatments and definitely things that are make it more livable and non-detectable. So it really is. It's still something that is evolving. I believe that there will be a cure soon. If not yet, actually, there's already talks of there being a cure. So it'll hopefully be stigma will kind of fade away with time. But it is just crazy because 30, 40 years ago, it was very strong and prevalent, and it basically outed you, and that was not a comfortable thing to do.
Yeah, I think that that was another big thing for me, like, while I was doing the research, was that, like, not only did you find out you had this disease that, like, they're basically like, "There's no cure, you're going to die, like, sorry, have a good day." Not
Right.
only did they basically say that to you, but they also were like, "Oh, by the way, you also don't have a job anymore, and by the way, we're also gonna inform everyone that you're gay, because we
Yeah.
know."
Hmm.
So, it was not only, like, finding out that you had something that I would honestly compare to getting a diagnosis of like cancer during that time. Like they literally like they're like, there's nothing that we can really do for you. Sorry, have a good day. And then you don't have a job and your family is most likely not talking to you because they know that you're gay now, and a lot of families back then didn't support that.
Right. Yeah.
So, did anything that we discussed today change your perspective on serial killers or the criminal justice system?
Um, I would say the thing that the way that it has impacted me or influenced me in my perception of serial killers is I think serial killers evolve just as anybody else does. At the time, snagging people from their cars or doing it inside a house, taking them from the clubs was probably the easiest way to go about it. But now, I mean, those are all still very possible things, as well as like online. Like through Grinder, I know that even right now, there's a big thing that's going on where people will basically get sexual photos from other people and then try to expose them for that and like find basically all public records online and threaten to send it to like their work locations, their friends, their family, and that sort of stuff. And like to me, those are all kind of like peaks and actions of serial killers starting to be, as well as just like scammers in general. But it just goes to show you how more accessible information is out there in the world, and serial killers will probably use that to find their next victims and to do their next things. And although technology within the police department and detectives and that sort of stuff and criminology and forensics is coming to light more, so are ways to get around it and like hacking and getting it. So it's just it goes to show that you're never really safe. There's no guarantee on safety, and so they're still out there. Keep an eye out for them. Be cautious. Be safe. Actually, it's a story that I heard this weekend about a guy. You don't even know this. Was there was a I had a friend that I met this weekend. She was telling me how her friend went to college. She went on a Tinder date with a guy. He they had a great night. They bonded really well. Everything seemed fine. He was very normal. He left her apartment. A few hours later, he texted her and was like, "Hey, I'm sorry. Like this is kind of embarrassing, but like I got locked out of my house or whatever reason. He couldn't go home and go to bed. So he asked if he could like crash at her place for the evening." She, it being the first date, she was still smart about it, and she was like, well, yeah, you can come, you can stay on my couch, and she stayed in her room and locked the door. And a few hours later, he came and he knocked on the door and he was like, "Hey, I forgot my phone charger. It's at my house, but I have work tomorrow morning. Is there any way I can borrow your phone charger?" And she didn't want to open the door or anything. She felt a little uneasy by it, so she was like, well, what time do you have work?" And he was like, 6 a.m. She was like, "Okay, how about I wake up at 5 a.m.? I'll give you the charger then, and you can charge your phone while you're getting ready before you go to work." And he was like, "Okay, yeah, that's fine." And then a few more hours pass, and he like starts banging on her door again, demanding for her to let him in. And she calls the cops. The cops show up. A little bit goes by. She basically asks the cops, like, "Hey, is it safe for me to come out now?" And they told her, "No, not yet." The man had a tarp laid out with all these cutting tools and things to kill her. So if she had opened her door once to come out, she would have died. And like the fact that that happened to someone our age, like within the year, is like baffling to me, because it's clearly still out there. People are crazy. They're psychos. Stay away from them.
People are literally sick in the head. Yeah, no, that's actually quite terrifying. But I always tell people, literally, if you have a weird feeling about someone, trust it. Trust
Amen.
your intuition.
Amen.
Trust your intuition 1,000%. Like, I feel like just trusting your gut it can get you out of a lot of situations. But
It really can.
honestly, I'm very happy that your friend's friend is safe and
Yep.
okay.
Me too.
Because watch who you are matching with on Tinder, guys.
Tinder. You should start doing background checks.
No, seriously, I feel like a lot of people have said that about Tinder, and Tinder is basically like, that's not our problem. Sorry. But so what role do you feel that the media played in this case?
I feel like if anything, it was probably um a negative light towards the LGBTQIA community, and like I hate to keep going back to it, but I know that at that time it was so much worse than it is now, in the sense of like the stigma behind all of it, and almost like when it was being reported, it was about, these gay individuals. So it was like he was targeting them, and so it was like it's kind of bad to be gay, and so like, don't be gay and you won't die type thing. Um, but yeah, and also again, just the fact of like being outed and that sort of stuff, even after your life is passed. I know that not all of his victims did die, so I mean, some of them did still have to live with the aftermath of, what happened. So I think it's yeah, yeah,
I think my biggest takeaway was kind of how the media portrayed the victims that were like businessmen and had wives and had children who were still gay, but the media didn't really say that because they
yeah,
weren't out there gay.
yeah,
But I think that it was the way that they wrote those headlines versus the way that they wrote the headlines about the ones who were out and open and like proud of themselves, and like, which they should be. Like, you should live your life and you should live it unapologetically. And they were the harshest on those people. They called them, I want to say in one instance, if I'm like remembering correctly, they basically like called them a prostitute essentially. And like, yes, that was true of that victim, but at the same time, you wouldn't have written it like that had it been someone who you felt was, I guess, I don't want to say like marketable per se, but like, you wouldn't have written it that way had you felt like that person deserved more than just being recognized as a prostitute, essentially.
right, yeah, yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, what key takeaways do you hope that our listeners have gained from this episode or that they will gain from the episode?
Be vigilant, but not afraid. I think that they'll take away the things that we've hit so far, which is, you know, serial killers are still out there. This instance did not happen long ago. And then also, not to judge a book by its cover or like anyone like that. Also, with Richard kind of being he wasn't an oddball. I mean, he was pretty normal growing up. He, you know, was a little scrawny kid, so he wasn't like super into sports or anything like that. But I mean, other than that, he was an intelligent individual. So I think it just goes to show that they're not always like easy to spot weirdos. They can be very personable and easy to get to know and chill to hang out with. So yeah.
That is very true. Are there any particular aspects of this case that you find yourself thinking about more deeply after our conversation?
Yeah, I would say like even so being a drag queen and doing the things that I do, I'm exposed a lot more to people that I have very brief encounters with. A lot of the times will also follow me on social media and message me or whatever. And I think every time now, and like nothing extremely bad has happened of it yet. Have had a few conversations here and there that I'm like, "Ooh, this feels weird, feels a little uncomfortable." But it does make me think now every person, that does message me through Instagram or Facebook that I haven't met or that I don't remember meeting, um, just to proceed with caution, to be very aware of any red flags or anything. Um, I think with me, I will always end up giving people a chance. It's the nice guy in me, and I don't like to judge people before I get to know them. But I think you said it best. If you have an inkling or a feeling, a feeling about something, trust it. Trust it.
Yeah, I also like obviously like we're best friends. So like that like I probably am not the safest person in the world either. Like guys,
Me
I've
either, girl.
hooked up
Me
with
either.
strangers on the internet before. It's don't do it.
No.
But I will say that like since I guess like getting older or like not even getting older, just starting this podcast, I have become like way more cautious. And I think like one of my biggest things that I try to ask people when I'm like going on dates with strangers, I ask them two questions. And I feel like everyone should start asking these two questions. My first question is I always ask them, do they have a passport? Because if you have a passport, then usually that means like you probably don't have like too many crazy things in your background. And then my second thing that I always ask them is, do they have global entry after they have the passport? Because if you have global entry, that means the US government has looked into you at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, someone's did a background check on you.
Right.
Can't be a full blown psycho. At least they haven't caught you yet.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right. And then my last question to kind of wrap up this post podcast interview is, are there any related topics or cases that you think would be interesting to explore in my future podcast?
That's a good point. I think it'd be really fun to highlight maybe if there's any female serial killers. Just because like I think a lot of the times we always just kind of assume it's a guy, and it normally is. That's kind of what statistics show, but bitches can be crazy too.
All right. I swear that he didn't know that I was doing this next month, but next month I am actually covering my first female serial killer. He genuinely didn't know that
I
I was doing
genuinely had no idea.
that.
That's crazy.
Because I felt the exact same way. I feel like I always talk about men serial killers. And I was like, there are women serial killers out there too. They're not like as dime a dozen as men
Right.
serial killers are, but they're definitely out there. So men, y'all be safe
I
too.
could tell by your reaction on your face when I said that. You were like, at first I thought you were being like, excuse you, a woman, a serial killer? So that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. But thank you again so much for being on my podcast. I really, really appreciate it. This has been such an amazing experience. So kudos to you. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about Richard and his sadistic tendencies of liking to murder people from the LGBTQIA community.
Well,
So,
thank you for having me. Thank you, Richard, for not murdering me. He might now after, I don't think he'll ever get out of
okay,
prison,
he's
but
locked up. You're
he's
fine.
locked up for good. He's
He
locked up.
is locked up in Trenton, New Jersey. And as someone who was there last week, they got that place on a tight lockdown.
Perfect. Period. Period. To all your viewers and listeners, thank y'all for allowing me to babble on your ear for a little bit. If you haven't listened yet, definitely go and listen because I know that it's really good. But this, I'm glad that we kind of got to debrief in this interview and talk about it a little bit more in depth, in case there were some things that we didn't cover too well in the podcast. But I am happy to do it at any time. And yeah, thank y'all. Love you.
All right, guys. Mason's episode will be coming out on next Wednesday. That's when this episode will be dropping. And until then, like I always tell you, stay safe, stay curious, and don't let anybody murder you.
Period.
Have a good day, guys. Bye.
Bye.